Hello, my beautiful caterpillars, and shout outs to my 103 subscribers. We're growing, so let's keep going. As always, the information in this video is intended for educational purposes. Please speak with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your lifestyle. If you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing this video as it does help with the YouTube algorithm. In today's video, we're going to be discussing cervical mucus and how we can use cervical mucus changes as our body's personal calendar. It's a great way to plan for pregnancy or avoid getting someone pregnant. So if that's something you're interested in, keep watching. Now, this particular video was inspired by a conversation I was listening to from a content creator by the name of DJ Akademiks a couple of months ago while I was researching this topic. And in that video, he described finding himself in a situation where he was facing a potential unplanned and unwanted pregnancy. Now, you're going to be listening to two clips. And in the first clip, he mentions the certain signs, physical signs he noticed during his encounter with the young lady. And in the second clip, he'll be describing her alleged plans to trap him by identifying when she was ovulating. So let's have a listen to what he has to say and then come back with some commentary.
Whatever. She told me that, dog. Anyway, nigga, I'm beating it down one day. Bruh, that shit was extra gushy, nigga. She's like, whatever. She said, nothing to me again. I'm like, I convinced him that I took some Depo shot, didn't take it. Yo, I made sure I was ovulating. I had the nigga nothing to me type shit. Blah, blah, blah. Whatever. Like, she just basically just told her I lied about the whole situation to try to get this nigga to get me pregnant.
Now, you just heard what he had to say. Now, I just want to make a quick distinction that this type of cervical fluid we are talking about is the type that is naturally occurring during the first half of the menstrual cycle, during the follicular phase, when estrogen is at a higher concentration than at any other time during the menstrual cycle. And as estrogen increases, so does cervical mucus, and cervical mucus changes occur throughout the first half of the cycle. Now, in part 2 of this series, we discuss the changes that occur with the hormones on the road to ovulation. If you haven't seen that video, I definitely recommend you check it out. Now, the type of cervical fluid we're going to be discussing is the one that happens naturally. So if you or your partner was to go to the bathroom and you were to use a napkin, the cervical discharge on the napkin is what we're talking about. This type of discharge doesn't require any type of stimulation, as opposed to the one that occurs during any type of intercourse. In this video, we'll be discussing one of the 3 fertility signs, again, cervical mucus changes that occurs during the menstrual cycle, which can help you either get pregnant or avoid getting someone else pregnant. So DJ Academic, this video is just for you. So there are 4 types of cervical fluid changes that occur during the first half of the menstrual cycle. The first one being dry cervical fluid, which occurs around day 6 to 7 of a 28-day cycle, followed by sticky cervical mucus, which occurs around day 7 to 9 of a 28-day cycle, followed by creamy cervical fluid, which occurs around days 9 to 10 of a 28-day cycle, and egg white or watery cervical fluid, which occurs around days 11 to 13 of a 28-day cycle. Now, the following pictures and videos are not necessarily normal quantities for most women. So if you find that the quantities are a bit exaggerated or they're extremely different from what you may be experiencing, just know that you can get pregnant with less cervical fluid, as to what will be shown in this video. So let's get into it. Dry cervical fluid. Well, to say dry cervical fluid, that's a bit of an exaggeration. We're not talking about the Sahara Desert here. We're talking about days 6 to 7 of the menstrual cycle, where women may experience a bit of dryness or their dry phase. And what that simply means is that there is no noticeable mucus, and women can find themselves feeling dry down there. So there's hardly any visible discharge during this time, and this dryness usually is a sign that you're not in a fertile phase of the menstrual cycle. Now, I want to say that I'm not a gynecologist, so please speak with your healthcare provider about this specifically, but typically a woman will not get pregnant during this time of the menstrual cycle where she has dry cervical discharge, because this type of cervical fluid is not conducive to assist sperm in getting to the egg. Now, always remember, if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 of this video series, the whole purpose of a menstrual cycle is to prepare the body for a potential pregnancy, and the whole purpose of the changes in cervical fluid is to assist the sperm and to nourish the sperm to get to the egg. So keep that in mind. So this type of cervical fluid is not particularly conducive to fertilization of an egg. So think of it this way: if you were to take your tongue and glide it against the inside, up and down the inside of your cheek, that type of sensation, slight wet sensation, is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the Sahara Desert type of dryness again. So let's keep going. Again, cervical fluid during this stage is very minimal, and it evaporates quickly within seconds during this time. So let's look at a video. Again, if you were to take a napkin and you were to look at the discharge on that napkin during this type of cervical fluid, you'd realize that it's very minimal in moisture. So have you noticed this type of cervical discharge in you or your partner? The second type of cervical fluid is sticky cervical fluid, and this occurs around days 7 to 9 of a 28-day menstrual cycle, where some women may experience a sticky cervical fluid. This type of fluid is very thick and has an adhesive consistency and will be unique to each individual woman. So you may or may not see this type of fluid, but it does occur around days 7 to 9 of the menstrual cycle. It is thick and sticky and can be flaky and tacky in consistency, and it may also appear to be cloudy or whitish and non-stretchy. What's most important to note is that this particular cervical fluid is not wet. It is considered to be less fertile and indicates that fertility is approaching, but it has not yet occurred. It's often tacky and may not stretch between your fingers and may break even if you try to stretch it. It might oftentimes break apart. Again, this cervical fluid is typically observed during the less fertile phase of the menstrual cycle. It doesn't mean that you can't get pregnant or can't get someone pregnant during this phase of the menstrual cycle, but it's most likely unlikely to occur during this phase of the menstrual cycle. So let's look at the video. This cervical fluid can be sticky in sensation, and if you rub your fingers together, it may resemble dry rubber, as it appears to be rubbery and type of springy. So have you noticed that type of cervical fluid in you or your partner? The third type of cervical fluid happens around days 9 to 10 of a 28-day cycle, where some women experience a creamy discharge with a texture such as lotion or cream. It's typically white or off-white in color and has a moist or wet sensation when observed externally. So oftentimes women may think that they have some type of infection, whereas it's just the body's normal way of telling you that you're moving closer and closer to ovulation with this creamy lotion-like texture. So long as there's no itching, burning, or odor, then you can consider this to be normal. As estrogen increases, so too will this cervical discharge change into a more wet discharge, which is more conducive to fertility. So this type of fluid, though it's not the most fertile cervical fluid, you can get pregnant with this type of cervical fluid, or you can get someone pregnant with this type of cervical fluid. Again, it is more favorable than the sticky cervical fluid for sperm survival, and also supports the movement of the sperm towards the egg if ovulation occurs. So let's look at a video. Most noticeably about this type of consistency is that it's wet. It's not the most fertile, but you can get pregnant during this phase. So have you noticed this type of cervical fluid, this type of creamy cervical fluid in you or your partner? And lastly, we have egg white or watery cervical fluid, which occurs around days 11 to 13 of a 28-day cycle. And this type of fluid is typically egg white in color, and it's very slippery. Remember, this is the most fertile type of cervical fluid, as it is very conducive to assisting the sperm get towards the egg once ovulation has occurred. Its most noticeable characteristic is that it usually stretches to about 1 inch, and is clear, and is very lubricative, or it's very watery and moist. And when it stretches, it typically will not break. Of course, this picture is not normal quantities for most women, so don't freak out if you or your partner don't see this type of cervical fluid. Just know that even with less cervical fluid, or not as dramatic cervical fluid, you can still become pregnant. Of course, as you get older or get closer to menopause, the quantity will diminish because estrogen diminishes, as there's less follicular development during the first half of the menstrual cycle. And let's look at a video. Also noteworthy is that the cervical fluid during this time can also be watery and can be felt more slippery down there in that area. And you will oftentimes observe a damp circle on your underwear due to the high water content. So that's also another indication that you are close to ovulation, if when you see that damp circle area on your underwear. This fluid can also be streaked, it can be yellow, it can also be pink or have a red tinge, all indicating that there may be some ovulatory bleeding during this time. So when you think about this type of cervical fluid, egg white or watery, think of it being stretchy, clear, and very lubricative, indicating that it's very wet type of cervical fluid. So have you noticed this type of cervical fluid in you or your partner? I hope you found this video to be useful. Again, cervical fluid detection is a great way of identifying where you or your partner are in the menstrual cycle, and when is the best time to either avoid having intercourse without a barrier method, or if you're trying to get pregnant, this type of cervical fluid is the best type of cervical fluid to assist with those goals. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing the video to someone you think it may be useful to. And if you've stuck around this long, again, thank you. In part 4, we'll be discussing the second half of the menstrual cycle, leading up to the occurrence of your period if pregnancy isn't achieved, and some of the problems that can occur during this phase, such as infertility and PMS symptoms. As always, my beautiful caterpillars, I'll see you where? At the edge of your comfort zone.